listening to The Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch. Special co-host tonight, today, wherever, whenever you are, is Jasmine Hurst, photographer, videographer, psychic, co-head of the Lydian Coven. And our very special guest is a good friend of mine, poet, writer, painter, ghost summoner, Joe Coleman. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Lydia. I'm happy to be here.
Joe, one thing I wanted to start with, now we kind of go way back because we came up basically in the late 70s in New York.
I can't remember the exact time, but it was late 70s, early 80s, and that was when I was driving a taxi, like it was the old checker taxis. Travis Bickle.
So sorry you never picked me up.
Well,
you kind of are the Travis Bickle of the art world in a sense.
Yeah, but the stuff that I saw in my taxi made that movie look like Sunnybrook Farms. But yes, that was the period that we met, and I was living in the Lower East Side, and you were at that time. I don't remember the first meeting, but you brought up a funny anecdote. Was the fact that you cooked dinner for me back in the early days.
And I did it again tonight.
Yeah. Did you know you were going to cook dinner tonight? Was it because of that?
Of course, no. I always cook dinner.
Oh, you're always doing it. Okay.
People are hungry. Plus, I exhaust them, so I got to feed them then. Plus, I touched everything that's going in your mouth, so, I feel good about that.
But it was in Brooklyn.
Right.
Because I was used to living in the Lower East Side, so it was a big deal for me to come to
the
Brooklyn.
First exit in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Although that's where I live now anyway.
Of course. Yeah. We would have been neighbors, but I predated. But, down in those days, and you were taking your life in your own hands coming to the York Street subway stop, first exit in Brooklyn. You survived.
Yes, nevertheless.
I don't even know how or why I would have invited you to dinner other than, because I don't really remember too much about our early meetings. I know that at that time, you were probably still doing steel tips.
Well, I stopped doing steel tips. By 1980, I wasn't with Steel Tips.
And Steel Tips was I struggle to say, musical concept that involved also you blowing yourself up as a predate to maybe Suicide Bomber.
The blow-up side of my performances was to me like, a more primal thing. So I kind of started to disdain having, a band behind me. All this music mishmash took away from the essence, the primal essence. So then I started to do these performances where I would bite the heads off of live animals and throw their carcasses at the audience, and and I would put more and more explosives on, and then it became more primal when I was.
What were you exercising with these one-man demolition derbies against what could have possibly been your own life?
Well, possibly an aspect of it is a war with myself. Obviously, I think the
war within.
Yeah, and really that's the only war that anyone really ever fights, and no one ever wins. Everyone loses. But nevertheless, you're drawn to fight. It makes me think also of the geek side of those performances. Were in a way the more interesting aspect for me, because as a child I grew up watching Nightmare Alley.
Oh, one of my favorite films. Oh, absolutely.
And
glorious.
also reading the book by William Lindsay Gresham, which describes a sideshow carny who, in the beginning of the book and of the film, he meets a geek, a sideshow geek, which is a man that bites the heads off of live animals for the entertainment of the masses. And it's usually like a Bowery bum or a horribly degraded human being who kind of frightens the main character, the con man in the beginning. And he sees the geek and he goes, "Oh, how can a guy do something like that? Was he born that way?" And then there's this old carny guy that is watching him. He says, "Hey, when you've been in the carny a little bit longer, you should learn to stop asking questions." He begins to become a very successful con man in the spiritual racket. unlike you, Jasmine, he did not believe in it. He thought it was a big game, and he could trick these wealthy people out of their money by pretending that he could contact the dead family.
Yeah.
But it was always phony to him. And he got people to like pretend to be them and dress in their clothes, but only be really far away. And it was a whole scheme that unraveled. And he became an alcoholic and a hobo, and he's wandering around like.
So you took this as great inspiration.
Well, what happened? Yeah, it was that moment.
Character.
That moment, like when here he is, he wanders. He sees an old circus, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. And he comes to the tent, and the guy that's running the circus sees him and says, "Hey, come here." I said, "Have a seat."
Yeah.
So yeah, look, mister, I really want a job. I can do magic. I'm really good at palmistry. I can do great. And he said, "Yeah, just sit down. You want a drink?" He said, "Oh yeah, refreshing, absolutely." He pours him a drink. I said, "That was good. You want another?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh yeah, even better. So when we put my banner up, it'll be." He said, "No. Palmistry is that's too passé." I said, "Oh, well, I could do magic." I said, "No one's interested in magic anymore." I said, "Oh, okay, thanks, mister. I'll leave now." And he said, No, sit down. There is a job. I'm not sure if you want it, but do you know what a geek is?"
There we go.
And then he says, "Yeah, I know what a geek is." And then the old guy says, "Do you think you can handle it?" And this guy that's just going through hell says, "Mister, I was made for it." So I thought that to start from the bottom.
There we go.
Yeah, like start from the very
Start
bottom.
from the geekdom.
Yeah, go from, because there's something amazing about reaching to the other side, like the primal side. The degradation is actually a metamorphosis, and it actually frees his soul, because there's no need,
There's no place
for
further,
morality,
right.
for reason.
And there's no place further to go down.
Yeah. It's all, there is no line. All lines
You're
are
on
gone.
the baseline.
Yeah.
And everything else is above it. So where are you going from that?
And for me, it became a starting point.
I love the quote, I think it might have been the New York Times, I'm not sure, that said, if P.T. Barnum wanted Bosch or Breughel to make circus banners in the 1920s, they would have had Joe Coleman do them. I thought that was a pretty good summation.
Yeah, I liked that. It had the right honor, and
I want to go back to something you had touched on, or at least the word, where you were saying, like, and we were discussing this before, about this war we all have in our blood. We have war in our blood. And you were saying, the only real war that we ever really wage is the war against ourselves. I think that we wage a war against our bloodline. And I know that in your bloodline, there's been a lot of battery, alcoholism, insanity, military.
yeah.
And that kind of mimics my heritage as well. And it's something that surprises me that we had no alternative but to channel it into something creative. Otherwise, we would either both be dead or in prison.
Well, yeah, it surprised me that, like when I was corresponding with John Wayne Gacy, and he was painting these kind of like bucolic, like Seven Dwarfs paintings, and very kind of mundane, pathetic kind of paintings. Yet his life was full of this, just unexpressible pain and rage. Yet his paintings were very kind of fun and silly and
Amateurish, because
yeah, and it reminded me of my father, because my father, who was a violent alcoholic that also a very decorated and honored soldier in World War II. He fought in both Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal. But he came home, unable to function, in a society that he fought so hard to protect, and preserve. And there was no one looking out for him when he came home. He was a young man, and he rose to be a master sergeant, but always in the worst of it, And can you imagine the responsibility that he had for all these young men that he was looking out for? So yeah, he was a mess. He scared everyone in the neighborhood, and was always.
It couldn't get the war out of his blood.
No,
because it was there. I mean, it was probably even there before he went to the war.
Yeah, it was probably there before.
Because he wasn't the first man in your family that went to war.
That's true. But the thing that I think I was getting back to was his paintings, because he's also the one that gave me my first set of paints. And
when you were how old?
It's like 5. It's around 5 years old. But he was painting lighthouses and seascapes and all these very, bucolic scenes. And he would use them often to pay his bar tab until he got kicked out of, that bar where they wouldn't allow him back. But there was something about the side of him that was also very gentle. He was able to put out, in these paintings, but he couldn't in his
daily life.
Yeah, and I found that really interesting. And he was. Everyone in my family hates him, but I don't hate him, and I did hate him for many, many years, but I actually...
Well, until you come to actually understand not only that, that before him came other abusive men in the family. This is a heritage we share. It doesn't start with our dad. And war, and men that went to war, they would come back, and before the Vietnam War, men never expressed what war was, and they came back wounded. They were alive, but they were dead inside. Whether they had murdered, they were alive, but how much murder, how much bloodshed, how much pain, and then they come back to what? Being unrecognized, so he's decorated. And the question is that why you're so decorated on your vest? I mean, you're like a decorated general in the war against insanity and hatred.
Yeah, it's the war of my life,
Exactly.
And that's why I wear the medals, that mark, what I've been through, and my father really never got the ones that he really, deserved, and he'll always, he'll always be with me, and I'm looking out for him, and I'm looking out for him that are in the marginalized people that I paint, because, those are the,
wounded soldiers.
Yeah.
From whatever war they fought.
Yeah, and
they're all fighting the war within
themselves.
Exactly. Jasmine, do you want to jump in on this about some of the stuff we're talking about? I mean, really, because Joe, in a sense, he is an exorcist. He is a ghost hunter. His paintings are full of wounded, tortured people, some that have tortured other people. And it is his mission. It's like, so with so much war in the patriarchal family line, his job seems to have actually been to go to the most war-torn and then express their stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, I am drawn to the more extreme stories because I don't know. It was, it's maybe too easy to sympathize with, someone who, robs a gas station because their family is starving. And not that's it. I mean, that's definitely worthy, of an important, conscious effort to investigate that. But to me, I'm after like the most tortured souls, the worst of humanity, the ones that are, that are so-called beyond redemption. Because if that's true, if there is a human being that is beyond redemption, then there's no hope for any human being on the whole planet.
What I wanted to talk about is Lydia and I did a psychic reading with you, and I remember aspects, and one of them, I saw your past lives and I saw rats in a cage eating you, and then you talked about like your performance of eating rats, that it was completely connected. And I must say, of all the people I've done readings for, you had so many people. It was so rich and so many people coming. So I want to talk about the rats from what I remember from that reading.
Revenge against the baby rats.
Yes.
Well, yeah, that was really significant for me too, Jasmine, because no one told me that before, but it suddenly made a lot of sense to me. And we had never met before,
No.
And you didn't know anything about me.
No.
And you started talking about the rats, and I had no idea. And then it made so much sense to me, something that I saw a certain way, but then with your reading, I got to look at it in an entirely new way that I had never thought about before. That actually informed my tools and my abilities in a way that I hadn't thought about, and I cherish that because, all these things are like tools in which I need to, as a painter, as a performer, as a writer, all these things, it's so helpful to, when someone else, throws me back something that it might be bouncing around and is maybe so close I could never know unless another human being.
Well, Jasmine sees that which most of the rest of us don't. But she has the ability to pick up. And what's interesting is, I just want to describe your paintings for a minute to somebody who might not have experienced them, and they can, of course, go online and investigate them. First of all, they're either very small or quite large canvases that are intricately done with a one-hair brush that, in the surround of whatever character you are detailing and trying to exercise in whatever manner that they appeal or speak to you, lies in quite intricate fairy tale, only it's reality detail, the story, which is illustrated on the painting after years of research. And each painting, the bigger, of course, takes an exorbitant amount of time. So it's really like when you go into a painting, you are a historian, you're writing, you are telling the story, untold often, of these characters that might have just been painted with a fat brush by society, like, oh, mass murderer, oh, killer, oh, singer-songwriter, oh, outsider. So your job is to actually also excavate and give more life to these deader or living artists, murderers, people. And in a sense, you are doing what Jasmine does. You are seeing what nobody else sees, and you're bringing it to life. That's why the three of us are talking here today.
Well, and I also, the paintings take often years to just do a single one, and I can only work on one at a time.
That's something that's something that I really want to talk about, because when you decide on a subject, then you do the research, and when you start.
No, but also when. I think you know this, Lydia, but
yes.
When I start, it's a subject that I've become connected to in a way that I can't describe, because it's something that, it just happens. It just pulls me in. But once I'm there, it could be that I'm familiar with the subject, but that's when the real hardcore research starts. And I go research court transcripts. I go to, sites. Like with Swift Runner, maybe that's a way to give you an example of what it's like. I went to Alberta, and I found either around where the encampment was, where he cannibalized his own family. I went to to where Fort Saskatchewan was, and there had been a recreation of Fort Saskatchewan that I went to be in the same environment, the really harsh environment that he was living in. There was the Glenbow Museum in Calgary I then traveled to, because they actually had Swift Runner's breastplate they didn't have it on display in the museum, I guess because it was
Too
politically
controversial.
incorrect
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
too
just too
controversial.
controversial. But they allowed me to come back, and I actually held it in my hands,
Absorbing.
Yeah. So then I know that he's with me, and to have that kind of connection, is really important. And often you see the paintings, have fetish objects attached to them that bring you there, as well as the narrative. The objects bring you.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. I mean, you are really ultimately in your paintings condensing someone's entire life, but as a painting, they are so illustrated. I mean, they're whatever the size, so immense in detail. Because how can you condense a person's entire being? But that's basically what you're trying to do, is you are bringing their life story, their trauma, their reason into existence after all the research you've done, based on why and however when they actually come to you, I think.
Yeah.
And it's you as they're using you as a voice.
Yeah, and I'm a filter, and Jasmine
Channeling.
is. Yeah, but I also say filter, if you don't mind, Jasmine, because there are certain things that won't come through, like with channeling or with a filter. There's certain things that don't, even might want to come through, but they don't because
for whatever reason.
So for whatever reason, you and I are, bringing out as much as we can, and then it comes out.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about your amazing collection, because that's where we did the reading. So I was picking up energy from all the objects as well as you, which is why it was so layered.
The auditorium.
But when did you start your incredible collection, and what are the most important objects that you have?
Well, it's hard to say when it started. I mean, it's...
Do you ever throw anything away, Joe?
Yeah, furniture.
Because there's no room in your auditorium for them, because it's full of incredible objects collected from all over the place.
But some of the objects are really unassuming and don't really seem like very much, but they're so powerful, and say so much. But I'm also trying to figure out how it started, too. I'm not exactly sure, Jasmine, how it started. I always was fascinated by roadkill.
Started with the roadkill. Do you feel lonely when you're not surrounded by your objects?
No, I don't necessarily. I feel more like a responsibility to them. I almost feel like they're more lonely if I'm not there than I'm
sure they miss you, Joe.
Yeah, and that's a weird thing to say.
No,
but that's what I feel like.
Well, again, because you are the person giving voice and giving life to these objects, which belong to people that are probably long gone into a different realm. Some might still be alive, we don't know. But you are the one still giving them life in your paintings and in your, I don't want to say you're not worshiping them, you're giving them a place to live, you're housing them.
Well, yeah, and I'm giving them a place where they can actually tell their story and they can communicate. So, like, there could be,
Are they ever screaming, all of them at once in your house? Are you ever in your house and just go, all right, stop the noise, guys?
In mine, I feel that they're at peace. They weren't at peace before, but they're at peace, so they don't really...
No, they're not chattering.
I've never...
No chattering. They chatter to Jasmine, but they're quiet around you.
They chatter, but they're at peace. They've never been so at peace.
Right, of course, because they're in a place of, in a sense, worship. Joe, you were talking before about Swift Runner, and that was a painting that took you quite a while, and you really went in depth, as you do on all of your paintings. But just give us a brief history of who Swift Runner was. I know he cannibalized his entire family.
His name was Koki Sikuchin, and he was called Swift Runner by the white men. That's the only records. There's very little records of what happened. In the mid-1800s, Swift Runner was a Cree, well-respected and loved hunter of the buffalo, and the Cree used the buffalo for everything. They used the buffalo not only for food, but for clothing, for shelter, for tools. So the buffalo was so primal to their existence.
And was this Saskatchewan or was this Alberta?
This is Alberta.
Alberta, Canada.
Yeah, this is Alberta, Canada. When Swift Runner was already kind of successful, I mean, the white man had come, but by the time he had created a family, he had a woman that he loved and children that he really cared for. He had a really happy life. And then when the white man came, they brought guns. And at first, the guns were great because the guns provided, a faster way to acquire the
necessary elements that you need, food.
And so at first
clothing.
it seemed really great, and Swift Runner was thankful for the white man's so-called gift. But then the white men were killing buffalo in mass. I mean, they were killing buffalo with cannons. And William Tecumseh Sherman, who decimated much of the South during the Civil War, was made military general during the so-called Indian Wars. To eradicate the Indian problem, he devised this plan that if you eliminate the buffalo, you eliminate the Indian problem. And so in the late 1860s or early 70s, there were no buffalo to be found between Cypress Hills and that Swift Runner and the Cree were living in. There was no buffalo,
So that means there's very little food, no clothing, and no tools.
So there's
basically.
Yeah.
The extinction of the buffalo leads to part of the extinction of the Indian population.
Right, and so what is left for him? So what he does is he goes out and he hires himself out as a guide to the Northwest Mounted Police, and they turned him on to whiskey.
Downfall of many a man.
The drink that Swift Runner loved the most was musky wobwee, which was a mixture of whiskey, turpentine, and tobacco. And
Poison, in other words.
Yeah, but that's what he was,
That's what he was into.
fond of and addicted to, and eventually he got into fights, with the Northwest Mounted Police, and they kicked him out of the fort, and so he no longer had a way of bringing anything to the family. And he'd lost his manhood, he'd lost, everything. And so it was a particularly harsh winter when his family went out in the middle of the wilderness. He stopped hunting. He just stayed at the camp in the tent and drinking, and he wouldn't go out. And so the rest of the family are starving. So they go out hunting for roots, or anything, anything they could possibly eat. He won't go. And they leave him to take care of the youngest one, the baby.
And he's starving.
Yeah, and he's starving, but
he's going insane.
His whole family is starving. He asked for a spirit guide because that's, was the way, of their people. And the spirit guide that came to him was the Wendigo. And the Wendigo is a cannibal spirit. And the Wendigo...
Inspired.
The Wendigo told him what to do. And
what to do was to...
And the first thing he did was to take the baby that was in his care, that he was babysitting. He hung it to a tree and pulled on it until it strangled. He cooked and ate the child. Then he went out and hunted the rest of his family, and he killed them and ate them. Throughout the whole... Look,
in a sense, he actually saved them from starvation.
Well, what I want to say, because I want to say two things about that.
His ghost right now.
Swift Runner's...
Choking on his ghost.
Choking.
Okay. Yeah, I'm choking on the baby's bones.
Well, he actually took her...
He took
the baby, and
strangled him. I know.
Yeah, and so maybe that's what's going on.
Going on.
But he ended their suffering. He ended the family's suffering. His suffering was just beginning.
Exactly, because now he is truly alone.
And also, the act of cannibalizing any human being is actually an act of love, because you're ingesting, this person inside you. Only like when it's done in a tribal act, you only eat the person you respect, or you eat the person that was in your family that you love and that's endearing to you. And during his trial, he said, "I didn't kill anyone's children. I only killed my own children." The white men took him because he came down from the wilderness back to Fort Saskatchewan looking for more whiskey, of course, and they saw that he was kind of fat, he was kind of portly, and the rest of the Cree were starving.
Carrying his family in him.
Yeah, and the rest of the Cree were starving. They put him in custody. They plied him with musky wabwi, which is what he loved, and he showed them where he killed his family. They took the bones, and they had a trial at Fort Saskatchewan, and it was a jury of 6 white men decided in 20 minutes that he was guilty. I'm not saying he wasn't guilty, but certainly I think there's...
Is guilty the right word?
But I think, who's really guilty, in
the
this
white
situation?
Man from driving out the food source, clothing source, and tool source that the Native American and Canadians were living on.
And also, justice by your peers. I mean, there's no one...
Well, good luck. Yeah.
But not to say that the Cree were not angry. The Cree also were very angry that he did this.
So how did Swift Runner come to you?
But let me just finish, because he deserves it. Because I went this far, and
of course,
and he deserves, every last bit. But to really savor all of it, you have to examine the painting. He was conned into becoming a Christian by Father Leduc, and the last act that they kind of made him do before they hung him was the act of Holy Communion, which is a symbolic act of cannibalism.
Exactly.
And so the
body of Christ.
Yeah, and so the whole story has all of the little bits and pieces of it are so telling, of atrocity at its core. All of America is responsible for a genocide that they
have not yet admitted to.
Yeah, that's worse or at least equal to anything the Nazis did.
Absolutely.
And the Nazis also looked to what America did with their genocide in the way that they were doing the final solution. So it's a story, because I'd want to do an indigenous person, because in my work I'm very American. My work is very American, and so I wanted to do something about an indigenous person, because I'm this from Irish heritage. I've been here, but it's not, my home is probably really in Ireland, but I wanted to do something about an indigenous person and what my Irish heritage, had, to do with that. I wanted to find something that is just
so indicative of actually what happened over and over again, hundreds and thousands of times that we don't know about. Exactly.
And the pain. I mean, and the horror
that America has caused and still causes to this day about every fucking thing. We claim we are. Look, America's the biggest hypocritical liar, duplicitous, warmongering, genocidal, homicidal maniac that has ever existed. It was founded on lies. It has killed the people that were here. It is wiping out most of the planet. It is absolutely brutal, evil, immoral, and a duplicitous liar. And here we are now. And you are the one who's trying to find the original stories which absolutely indict America for what it is. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Joe Coleman, and Jasmine Hurst.
Any of the people that we just talked about could not commit, the mass atrocity that a politician could, who is never really there and never takes credit, never really gets their hands dirty. And if there is a real evil, but I'm not really saying that there is a real evil. I'm not even sure about that. But that's more reprehensible. I have more understanding for the losers that are, acting out. This is what we're.
I agree. I'm not even sure there is evil. I just think it's humanity.
Yeah,
it's
and that's what I was.
Aspect.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to. I didn't want it to end that. That America's evil because Rome was evil, or Nazi Germany was evil, but all cultures are evil if you want to, put that kind of word on something. But I tend to not want to do that. But I think it's a much greater atrocity when an entire government doing a huge atrocity. And what I found most interesting too in the end about Swift Runner, to go back to him, is that imperialism is cannibalism because it's one nation digesting another nation. So yes, it's a destructive love, but even Swift Runner's love is a destructive love because look at how the so-called civilized world makes artistic so-called primitive art. Primitive art is what they strive for. They're always jealous of, and they want to get. The more primitive modern artists become, the more that they're loved. And maybe that's from a kind of guilt. I find that interesting too. But yes, I think that one nation cannibalizing another nation is an act of love.
When Gacy was executed, did you feel him? Did he come?
When my mother died, he sent me a condolence letter. Anyone that knows me knows that I was really close to my mother. A lot of people that I was really close to didn't, call me up or send a condolence card or anything. I'm not even saying that they should, but in fact, this monster sent me this condolence card in which he wrote, "Dear Joe, I heard of your mother's passing. I'm very sorry. I offered her prayers. I trust that she did not suffer much. When you're feeling better or up to it, please write me about the painting that I sent. I hope it arrives safely." He made this wonderful painting that I have in the auditorium. But it made me think about so many things, like about compartmentalizing the shrink terminology, for putting different parts of your personality into different rooms, say. And I think he was sincere when he said that about my mother. And I think that, even my father as a soldier had to put himself in different rooms. Like it's okay to kill this Japanese soldier because that's the enemy. And so also John Wayne Gacy, is saying, oh, I can kill this person because this is the person that I'm sexually, obsessed with and fetishize. But then these other people, they're different. They're not, in that category. And I think that humanity should think about compartmentalizing,
Do you think that
death.
John Wayne Gacy was killing the little boy inside himself that was forever wounded?
Yeah, absolutely. All those crimes were crimes of shame. I thought that,
Which is the American condition.
Yeah,
Shame
yeah,
is the American
yeah.
condition. Well, it's not as if, every murderer, everyone that's driven to murder, because I think just calling them a murderer is a blanket statement, is without compassion. As a matter of fact, they're deeply wounded, which is why they strike out. We're all deeply wounded, but those that have not been able to reconcile or recognize a way to get over that initial trauma, the initial wound, whether it's just the trauma of birth or the trauma of childhood, and of course most serial killers, not all, it's the wound of the mother, which is interesting because the wound of the father is what usually leads us to be serial artists. The wounds of the mother drives most men to be serial killers. I don't know exactly why, but that just seems to be the way it is.
the wounds of the mother are very different. My own mother, she was a beauty. I mean, she dressed like a Hollywood actress from, the old film noirs. Her favorite actress was Joan Crawford, and she...
Does she act like Joan?
No, but the manipulation came from guilt.
Catholic.
But yeah.
Well, there you go.
But it was amazing. I mean, she, I remember when I was a little kid, and she would pull up, in this beat-up station wagon to pick me up, but she was dressed to the nines, and like all the other kids, they're going, "That's your mom?"
But it's interesting. You mentioned the word manipulation, and there's nothing more manipulative than religion.
Yeah.
And I mean, because I know that you were raised for some time as a Catholic, and there's nothing more manipulative. I mean, religion is manipulation based on shame and horror, that if you do this in this life, eternal damnation, it's just another tool. And shame, guilt, insecurity, these are the American conditions. And this is why Americans, well, like most people, they're under chronic control of these tools, which are just weapons to keep them in place, which not all of us abide by. Have you ever felt guilt? I have never. I felt guilt once in my life. Delete.
I felt guilt, and I think there's a wonderful thing about it.
Well, then are you talking about, do you then apply that to your sexual reality? I mean, guilt? I don't get it.
I'm thinking that, the time that we live in right now, political correctness is like the worst, it's scarier than the Republican agenda. Because like great artists like Louis Buñuel dealt with his Catholic, guilt and fears, and Pasolini.
Murdered for his great art.
Yeah. To me, even Hieronymus Bosch transformed that into something of great beauty.
Goya.
Goya.
One of my favorites.
Those are,
Delicious.
and Dix and Grosch.
Absolutely.
I mean, all those things are of great, when you use them, they're your tools, but you can't be victimized by them. You use them.
As a very young artist, we're talking like under the age of 10, you were first influenced by comics and making your own comics. And then what is this Lady Bird Johnson buying one of your paintings when you were what? How old?
Yeah, I was in the third grade.
Nice. Catholic school?
No, I went to Sunday school. I was in public school for when that painting was made.
What was it a painting of?
I had to go to catechism, though.
What was a painting of?
It was a painting of garbage.
Some might say that you went on to human garbage, but that's only in their point of view, because you went on to paint saints and sinners.
My third grade teacher saw this painting, and I guess I painted garbage really well. So she put it in City Hall, a show of children's art. And Lady Bird Johnson, if you remember, she was sponsoring an anti-litter campaign.
Okay, there we go.
So she was traveling around America. She saw this painting that I did of garbage, and she thought it was a great indictment against litter. And so she bought it for her children's art collection. And it's in, my mother
Her collection?
Yeah, it's in, I still have like the newspaper clippings about, Lady Bird Johnson getting this painting.
That was your first taste of success.
Yeah, but also a time like today.
Same as it ever was, Joe.
It's always same as it ever was.
But same as it ever was.
Well, that's what I mean. It's just like history just kind of goes in circles. And I like what's the Tibetan wheel? Where it just continues.
It's been one of my mantras forever, same as it ever was, because it's like we have more access to the crimes and insanity that men have committed now, but it's always been the same. Is this any different than the Middle Ages? Is this any different than from the cave to the Middle Ages to medieval times to now? Really? The problems remain the same. Men, in general, are still greedy, war-whoring, homicidal, genocidal, patriotic, fear of others, insecure, bombing beasts. When will this end?
Well, I can't argue.
What's to argue with?
There's nothing I can argue with you.
When will it end?
Well, maybe.
I doubt. I'm not sure it will. But I have to say that I hope it might eventually end. But will it end?
But are you sure it's supposed to end?
Well, that's it. I mean, to me, I love the apocalypse. It's always apocalypse now. This is the nature of man. And back to the war in our own blood. Back to what we have to fight every day, which is why we create, in order to not become the people you paint.
First, I was going to say effort, and then I corrected myself inside myself, and
warring with words inside your own bloodline.
Yeah, I know. I continue to have to do that. It's a gift, I think, because I see the people unable to do that. And at first I think it's just an act of will. And I think, oh, if they could only,
Channel.
make that choice, they could be fine. But then I have to step back and think, maybe I've just been gifted with this.
I think
maybe
some of
it's
us
not
are just chosen to represent the thoughts and deeds, the actions, to explain in some ways that other people cannot articulate. So I do feel that some people are chosen, no matter, to spite or in spite of what our traumas have been, what our bloodline is. Doesn't matter. We somehow still, I felt like I was chosen from the age of 9. It's like I knew what I had to do. You at 5 knew what you had to do.
I always felt, and other members of the family felt too, that I was the father of my father. That was a difficult thing to have to deal with in our family.
Do you feel tortured?
I feel tortured, but also
blessed.
And I feel blessed, and I know it's my job, and it's this the lifetime.
You take on the torture of others,
and it's okay, and I can feel guilt. If you don't feel guilt, you can't really get inside the skin.
Well, I empathize, but I don't feel, and it's not like I'm guilt-free. It's just that there are certain emotions, I think, which are cancer-causing, that I'm just not going to abide by. It's like not even a decision. I just don't inhabit them. So I might be the odd man out on that sentiment.
No, I can't. I can't argue with what you're saying.
Your guilty existence, even though for crimes you did not commit.
Yeah, I'll take on crimes that I didn't.
And again, this is guilt that is in your blood.
I know, and there's the old saying sins of the father.
Of course.
So I was born with sin, and Catholicism also then reinforced
I would really
that.
like to whack that right out of your head with like a psychic surgery.
No, I embrace it.
I know you do. Well,
like
you take on the guilt, I refuse. Well, let's go back to my question previous. Does it have
Lydia,
anything to do with
it's
your
important
sexual
because you want to get away from this.
No, we don't. Get away from what?
Guilt.
Well, I don't want to get away from it. I just don't feel it.
Yeah, but there's something of great beauty
when you embody.
Yeah.
There's something in great beauty and power when you don't suffer from it, and not because you are immaculate, but because maybe you don't believe in it, because you allow people their crimes. You accept their mania.
But Lydia, what if somebody who also can feel their guilt is also not judging them and saying,
I agree.
And saying, I understand you.
Right.
I'm gonna,
you're
I
more
lift you up. Come with me.
Of course you do. You're far more sensitive than I am, and I have to be a representative to some degree of especially of a female entity that does not bear the burden of shame or guilt or insecurity or humiliation. Because I don't suffer from any of those things. And it's not just a decision, it's because I do not. And I have to give that as offerings to other women to come to my side of the table, especially women, men as well, but to also lift up the burden of certain emotions that have been placed upon them erroneously by society and by probably pollutants in their blood.
Well, I admire you for that, Lydia.
I love you too.
I have a great love for powerful women, and you've powerful.
You've been with one for more than 20 years, and you're sitting with 2 of them right now.
And they've also, I've been blessed with that. All like Kembra and obviously
Kembra, Whitney, Jasmine,
and Ozzy Argento, asked me to play out the Harvey Weinstein, trauma with me. What a great honor. I have to honor that for her to ask me to play out a real psychodrama on film with her. That was a great honor, you know.
Joe, I want to talk a little bit about your 8-year-in-the-making documentary, which I was privy to see some of it in Paris. And by the way, I just wanted to recap. We've done some shows together, and in the typical Lydian spin connective tissue, Mondo, New York, we were in a terrible film together.
Yeah.
We have done some shows together. Actually, you gave me the best introduction of my life at the Slipper Room. I love your poetry. We played in Paris under an Asia Argento event, and that's where I got to see...
And then I did something with you in Lower East Side.
Berlin with Weasel and I, Brutal Measures. Uh-huh. You are one of my favorite poets. Now, one thing about your poetry, so is that composed off the top of your head, or where does that stuff come from?
Well, I mean, it is a combination of, things that come to me and I jot them down, and then things that come to me at the time that I'm performing.
So a bit improv, but a bit...
Yeah, a little bit of both. With the paintings, like I know some of what's going to happen with the paintings, and then other things just happen.
Right. So the poetry is kind of the reduction of the spontaneous yet composed combustions of the paintings.
Well, I guess the poetry, connects to the stuff I did, as Dr. Mambuzu in the 80s, which was an outgrowth of Steel Tips, and also, the very name Mambuzu is mom,
mother, and your boozy dad.
Yeah, and Buzo, my dad.
Buzo dad. So tell.
And it was but it's a preacher. That's fire and brimstone preacher, but I don't know where he's going to go.
I feel like an evangelical when I'm doing my ranting.
I like the malaprops and misnomers often come into play.
So a little bit about the documentary. When will eventually that see the light of day? It's extremely well shot, beautiful, and in-depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing experience. Almost 10 years ago, I was going to a show of Nashville Pussy, really great band. There was this guy in the parking lot, and he's like going, "Hey, you Joe Coleman?" I said yes, and then he proposed this documentary to me. His name is Jim Muscarella. He became very passionate about making this, and he brought a director on who I didn't really get along with. And so that guy got fired. Then he brought another director on, whose name is Scott Gratcheff. And I started talking to him about Robert Ryan, obscure character actor. And once he knew who Robert Ryan was, and he understood something about the twisted...
Robert Ryan, like noir films?
Yeah, Robert Ryan was in noir, but yeah. Robert Ryan always played the these really dark characters in a way that brought them... a unique life.
Right, yeah.
I mean, his performances were always better.
What's his best film?
I mean, there's a couple of best films. Odds Against Tomorrow, he's amazing. And also The Wild Bunch. In The Wild Bunch, he's the Judas, because he betrays the gang. And he's actually the one who has to carry the weight of all of the betrayal, because they kill the whole gang. And
I see some parallels here.
Yeah.
I mean, because you carry the weight of many, many people. You carry the weight of all of the people you depict in your paintings.
Well, I was honored by this guy then committing his own money and then other people's.
And why is it taking? Is it going to follow you forever? I mean, 8 years is rather long in the making.
No, they're actually
wrapping it up.
Yeah, they are, but they're still shooting. But they are, at the editing process.
What's the title of it? The Unending Story of Joe Coleman and Whitney Ward?
I mean, I didn't make up the title, so if I say the title, and it's still a working title.
It doesn't matter, right?
But it's So Dark, My Love, which actually sounds like a Robert Ryan movie.
Or a Jim Thompson.
Yeah, or a Jim Thompson, yeah. Like when I saw what these guys were doing when they shot, I mean, they're so beautifully shot. Like every frame is preciously thought.
Absolutely very unusual looking documentary because it looks like a film. It doesn't look. I mean, documentaries have a certain look just because they do, and this really looks like a film.
Yeah, and they got
really gloriously filmed
and
very romantic.
Yeah, and they got me when I started making Doorway to Whitney, which is this epic love poem.
4 years in the making?
Well, even a little bit more than 4 years. So they shot me like with barely anything, there, because I don't sketch like when I'm doing a painting, like a lot of, especially figurative artists. I mean, abstract artists, it's not surprising that they would just like start anywhere and just like throw the paint around. But as a very meticulous, figurative artist, because I'm not a realist. I don't think I'm a realist, but I'm a very meticulous.
You're a meticulous.
Yes, meticulous. I'm a meticulous.
Yes, you are. With the one-hair brush.
But I don't have to know what the whole surface is.
Well, it's going to tell you as you go along also.
Yeah.
I mean, you are summoning. You have your own seances going for each of these paintings. I mean, it is like a summoning. You allow the characters, the actors in your paintings to speak to you. They come and actually, you are channeling.
They participate.
They participate.
It's not me, it's them.
The participatory art of Joe Coleman, who channels the living and the dead, artists, murderers, saints, sinners alike, into graphic novels on one piece of wood, sometimes small, sometimes large, telling the stories that are more elaborate than anybody else cares to delve into. He therefore is a historian, a journalist, a writer, a poet, a painter, and my good friend Joe Coleman. This is the Lydian Spin with Joe Coleman and Jasmine Hurst.